Okay, so as I mentioned, everybody should have submitted exercise 7 already. Let's go ahead and review exercise 6. So that was this one. It was the general conditions exercise. I gave you most of the particulars. You didn't have to do a whole lot of calculating quantities. There was a little bit, but not very much. The first thing that I want to bring up was the way the question was written. It said 30 work days, not just 30 days or 30 calendar days. It specifically said 30 work days. It also talked about a crew working 40 hours a week, which I was hoping everyone would realize that's 5 8-hour days. So it's 5 work days per week. So 30 work days divided by 5 work days a week is 6 weeks. So some of you didn't pick up on the fact that this was a 6-week project, not a 1 month or a 4-week project. So that's a pretty big issue. So your price was significantly lower than it should have been, comparatively wise. So that contracts nowadays, they go back and forth between saying days and work days. So you need to be very particular on what you read in contracts for whether it's work days or calendar days. Typically, if it just says days, that means work days. The Master Municipal Construction Document, the MMCD as it's called, if anywhere in there, if it says days, it means work days. Anyway, I've gone over that long enough, I guess. I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention. Some of you didn't pick up on that. So the next thing that I like to do, and I do this when I'm estimating in my day job as well, for general conditions, I usually have these 6 items as part of my general conditions. They're always in every estimate that I do. Now, maybe some of them are bid items. For example, sometimes environmental controls is a tender item. So it would not show up in your general conditions. So again, just a reminder, general conditions are indirect costs. They're not bid items, if you want to think of it that way. So as I say, sometimes things like environmental, maybe traffic management, those can sometimes be, depending on the contract, those can be bid items. So you wouldn't include these costs in a general condition section of your estimate, as well as a bid item or a tender item. Essentially, you're doubling up on those costs if you do that. And the whole point of estimating is to be the low bidder without being drastically low. So I was hoping everyone would use these 6 tasks or sub-items, however you want to think of it. They don't necessarily have to be in this order. That's just the way I've typed them up. So we'll go into the first one here, site office. So you were provided in the verbiage for the question, you're given a monthly rental rate as well as a weekly rental rate for the trailer. You were given the same thing for the generator. So I was looking for here 1 month plus 2 additional weeks. Those were the rental rates that were provided to you. Then you would just extend those costs out. With the fence, I'd say about half of you did not pick up on this. So if you're only given a monthly rental rate for something, doesn't matter what it is, in this case, we're talking about fence. If you're not given a weekly rate, you cannot prorate the monthly rate down to weekly rates. You have to get the supplier to provide you with that weekly rate. in our question, we were not given the weekly rate. So you have to allow for 2 months of rental. Our job was 1.5 months, so 1.5 up here. So you can't have 1.5 months of fence rental, so you had to round up to 2 months of rental. So the calculation there was you were given the dimensions of the building site. So in the question you were given the lot size being 50 meters by 75 meters, so it's a rectangle. So security fencing needs to go around the perimeter. So the calculation was 50 plus 75 times 2, so 250 meters all the way around. Convert into feet, so I multiplied by 3.28 feet per meter. Gives you a total of 820 feet of rental fence. Now that dollar per foot that was provided to you in the question is a rental rate per month. So you had to double that 820 and come up with 1640 feet for your total rental amount of fence. The toilets, on the other hand, you were only provided a weekly rate. You were not given a monthly rate. So that's simply 6 weeks times 125 per week. The generator, similar to the office, so you were given a monthly rate at $600 a month plus a weekly rate, so you could add in an additional 2 weeks at the rate. The fuel for the generator was provided to you as the generator uses 3 liters per hour. Now, again, in the write-up of the question, you were told that the crew would work 8 hours a day. So 3 liters per hour times 8 hours per day times 30 work days. So that's 720 liters at the per liter price that you were given of $1.25. I should also say, I guess at this point is good as any, that the last bullet of information in the question says the above rates include PST where it's applicable. So nowhere in this assignment should you have added PST. So again, it's just being an estimator. Of course, you need to read everything that's provided to you, but you need to understand what you've read. You were specifically told not to add PST. Some of you did. So it's important to read and understand what you're reading and price accordingly. So that was the site office. So the next one down was environmental. So you were told in the question that you needed 2 silt sacks. That rate was given to you. Some of you added in the extra cost of delivering those silt sacks to site, which is good. I was looking for that. Some of you also added in some labor time to install, which again, I was looking for that as well. This last one here, the sweeping. So in the question, it says sweeping is only necessary on days that you're hauling, so trucks coming in and out of the site. So you were told that you had 18 days of hauling. So that should be your quantity here, 18 days. Now the 200 per hour was, I kind of threw a curveball at you with the information that I provided. It says the street sweeper is $75 an hour. It can sweep the site in 1.5 hours. So some of you simply went 75 an hour times 1.5 hours. Whoops, there are equals there. And said that each day of sweeping cost $112. Well, the other part of that bullet says the minimum call out is a $200 charge. So it doesn't matter that the sweeper only takes an hour and a half to sweep your site. They're still going to charge you $200. So you needed to use 200 per sweep or per day of sweeping. So 200 times 18. So the next one down here, so traffic management. Again, in the writing of the question, you were told that you only need traffic control during days of hauling. Manmohan, yes, it's specifically mentioned in the question, minimum $200 call out. In the same bullet where it says $75 an hour. It's the fifth one from the bottom. Excuse me. So traffic management, again, it was noted in the question that you only need traffic control on days of hauling. So again, this is another 18-day calculation. It says you needed a flagger there. It says days of hauling for the duration of the shift. So again, it was 8-hour shifts. So 18 days times 8 hours times the hourly rate. So it gives you a total here. So the next one. So survey, you were given the lump sum cost. So you had a subcontractor that quoted the survey, so 6,500. Again, you were not to add PST to any of these numbers. So getting down here at the bottom, so materials testing. You're told in the question that there's a total of 1,100 cubic meters of imported fill that are coming to site. You did not need to cost the purchase and installation of that fill. That is not included in a general conditions part of the estimate. That would be a tender item, so a direct cost. So again, just to remind everyone, general conditions are indirect costs. 18 days of hauling, it says, so in the first paragraph of the question, it says the project requires import-export of material for 18 days where haul trucks will travel on public road. Yeah, no problem. So 1,100 cubic meters is the imported gravel. So again, in that first paragraph of the question, it says material compaction tests are required for every 250 cubic meters of fill. So you simply divide 1,100 divided by 250, gives you an answer of 4.4. We can't have 0.4 of a test. It's either 4 or it's 5. So you need to round up in cases like this. So cost of 5 tests, you were given the per test cost. The last one here, so hide. So the MOB, so you were told a couple different things here. So the site trailer, you were told as being, the MOB cost was $300 each way. So a MOB and then a demob cost. So you should have 2 times 300 here. So 1 for each direction. The low bed truck hours, I was fairly open with the number of hours that people put down. I wanted to see a couple things that you realize that 2 machines cannot fit onto 1 low bed truck. You needed to make 2 trips to get both machines to site. You were told that the job site was an hour and a half or 90 minutes from your yard area where the equipment's being stored. So what this calculation down here shows is the total number of minutes to bring all the machines to site. So I didn't tell you how long it would take to load and unload. I left that up to you. in my solution here, I use 15 minutes. So whether you use 10 minutes, 15, 20, 30 minutes, I don't believe I marked you wrong for any loading and unloading times that you selected. I shouldn't have anyway. If I did, please let me know and I can make that correction. So what's shown here is 15 minutes to load the first machine, 90 minutes to drive to site, 15 minutes to unload, 90 minutes to drive back to the yard, 15 minutes to to load the second piece of equipment, 90-minute drive back to site, and then 15 minutes to unload. So if you added all those up and then multiplied by 2, because you have to do the same process when you remove all the equipment from site. So you would get a total of 11 hours. If you were within an hour or 2 of that, or even 3 or 4, I think I was okay with, then I didn't take any marks off. But this was the total number that I was looking for. General freight, I didn't expect anybody to put any of this in here. You could have included a general freight cost to bring the silt sacks to site. So one load at $100. The rest of this probably should not be in here. I could delete this, truthfully. So your overall general conditions cost should have been approximately $24,000. I should note that a number of you included in your general conditions estimate the labor cost for 4 laborers at 40 hours a week. So that added a significant number of dollars to your cost. You should not have done that. Again, general conditions are indirects. So that bullet that says in the question, crew size is anticipated to be 4 people and they will work 40 hours a week. I did not expect you to go 4 people times 40 hours a week times 6 weeks times $45 an hour. Those costs would be elsewhere in your estimate in the direct costs or the bid items. Again, general conditions are not a bid item. They're totaled as we did here. So you come up with a total and then that total amount is spread over all the bid items. We'll look at how you do that in today's class. So it's important to understand, I'll say it again, that general conditions are indirect costs. So things like site office, environmental controls, traffic management survey, materials testing, equipment mob, those are all indirect costs. So things like purchasing and placing embankment fill to build the road subgrade, that would be a bid item, a tender item. So that's a direct cost. You would have a tender item of 1,000 cubic meters, I guess in our case, 1,100 cubic meters, where you would have the cost of purchasing the gravel, placing it on site, maybe with a dozer and a packer, you know, that type of thing. Is there any confusion on that part of general conditions? That's going to show up in the final exam, so it's important that you understand the difference. You're also going to need it when you get out into the world and start estimating. Any other questions on exercise 6 from 2 weeks ago? No, okay. So I will close this down. Okay, so that was review of exercise 6. So now we will go through the PowerPoint presentation. You can follow along on your handout that I uploaded earlier in the week, or watch your screen, I guess. So we'll bring that up. Okay. So week 8, overhead and profit. So some topics we're going to look at today, overhead. So things like supervision, office, either site office or head office, insurance, bonds. Those are all overheads, also referred to as indirects. Profit, we'll look at how you add profit to an estimate, how it's calculated and how it's factored in. I'll touch on some of the various estimating software that's out there, that's available. There's numerous types that all sorts of different companies use. Not sure we'll get into cost control. It's listed there, maybe on the last page of the PowerPoint. Yes, it is. Okay. So overhead. Overhead are indirect costs associated with performing a scope of work that are not directly related to bid items. So I mentioned that, I think, 3 or 4 times earlier today. So there's indirect costs and then there's direct costs. So direct costs are bid items. Indirect costs are overhead costs, which are also general conditions, all the same things, all indirects. So indirects are usually associated with what is necessary for a company to carry on business. So generally a function, or I guess not generally, but sometimes a function of annual revenue. So there's an example there. It says if a company does $10 million in revenue in a year, it's possible that they may have overhead costs of $1 million. So then typically each project will carry a percentage overhead cost in that estimate in order to cover that $1 million of overhead. There's some overheads that are covered by the project. So things like supervision, site supervision, I should say, as well as maybe the site office should be a general condition in the tender. It says there, the last sentence, be clear on what is paid for in the bid items. So again, you don't want to double up something in your indirects that is also a bid item in the tender, because you would have that cost in there twice. Last one there, calculated once. All the direct costs are estimated. Yeah, so you go through and you build your estimate through all of your bid items, through all your tender items. So you're building road grades, your subgrade, you're putting road gravels down, you're costing the paving, you're putting pipe in the ground, maybe it's a storm sewer or water system. So you're doing all those costs first to see what the duration of your project will be, as well as the total cost of the project. So those are all direct costs. Then you start looking at your overheads. So supervision, So of course, supervision is required on all projects, regardless of the complexity. Someone needs to supervise the crew. So the amount put as a cost to the project depends on the scope, the size, the client, the complexity. So do you have a superintendent, or do you have a foreman? Typically, those are different monthly costs. Normally, a foreman costs less than a superintendent does. So again, depending on the complexity of the project, you would allow for some type of supervision. Says there could include whether it's a superintendent, maybe if it's quite a large project, maybe you've got a project clerk, you've got a coordinator, you've got a project manager, project engineer, different field technicians, health and safety people, environmental technicians. So it really depends on what's required in the specifications, how big the job is. Do you have 75 employees working on this project? So you need multiple management to look after all these people. Things like the project clerk, the project coordinator, these two people here. They could be either on site or maybe in the head office. Some companies will include those costs in their tenders. Not all of them do. My company does not do that. Again, it really it depends from company to company if you do that or not. Next, their company will typically have a blended hourly rate for staff that includes wages and benefits. So we went through that earlier in this course. So you've got base rate, and then you have all these extra add-ons for all the benefits. So WCB costs, which is like an insurance. Maybe you've got union dues costs. There's EI. There's Canada Pension Plan. So there's all these additional costs that get added on to the hourly rate that you would use in your estimate. That's what the blended means here. So blended hourly rate. So it's the base rate plus all those add-ons. So for the supervisor, confirm if the supervisor's rate should include a vehicle or not. So does the supervisor need a pickup? For me and my company, we always include a pickup with the superintendent. They have a company vehicle, so they drive it to and from site. They're typically going to pick up, small hand tools and different things. So they need to have a vehicle that can carry kind of smaller loads like a pickup in order to keep the crew running. So photo of a superintendent on the left on a project. So they've got a pickup. Looks like a brand new Ford there. Photo on the right is a fairly large site office trailer complex. So number of portable buildings here. If this is one project, this is massive. I mean, you can see the number of cranes that are set up here. The job goes on off into the distance. This looks like it might be like an oil sands type project that's billions of dollars. Where the crew and the site office is here for years. This photo is not a standard construction job photo. It is, as I said, it's a massive project. So the office, so again, either site or the head office, so HQ meaning headquarters. Those site-specific offices will typically be included in an estimate. Yeah, that should not say direct cost. It's an indirect cost, a site office. So the head office, so that's where your head office staff stay. So not job specific. So people like senior management, maybe the owner of the company works out of the head office. The payroll clerk, you know, accounts payable, accounts receivable. Maybe if you have an equipment dispatcher, equipment managers, mechanics, they're all at the head office and or shop. So sometimes head office costs are included in estimates. Again, it depends on the company that you're going to work for. Some companies include head office costs in their tenders, others don't. Again, my company does not include head office costs in our tenders as a rule of thumb, for the most part anyway. So next bullet, the cost of operating the office. So again, this relates to the head office, so rent, utilities, etc. Those costs may or may not be included in your tenders. Administrative support is required for all projects. Again, whether you include those costs or not, you'll be told by your manager, by the company that you get hired with, which head office costs to include or not include. So head office cost, that last bullet there, typically added to a project estimate as an overall percentage. So some companies use a percent to allow for head office costs in all of their tenders, which shown here is 5%. So that's a good starting point. You come up with your total cost for your job, and then you add 5 additional percent to cover head office costs. So that's definitely one way to do it. But again, I need to reinforce that your company manager, your boss, your supervisor will tell you to add that or not. So insurance. All projects require insurance. That's a blanket statement. Insurance is needed on every job, no exceptions. A typical civil contractor will carry a number of insurance policies. So I list some of them there. So commercial general liability, if somebody gets injured, like a pedestrian gets injured on your job site, that liability policy will cover any of those costs. Wrap-up policy covers all contractors on a job, including subs. That is not necessarily included in every tender. You need to look in the insurance spec of the job that you're bidding on, and if a wrap-up policy is required, it'll say it in there. So a wrap-up policy is not included in every job. Commercial general liability is. Builder's risk, in brackets, course of construction, protects against loss or damage to buildings during construction from things like vandalism, theft, fire. Depending on the type of construction that you get into, civil construction where you're putting pipes in the ground, typically you don't have builder's risk, a builder's risk policy. If you get hired by a commercial contractor, maybe you're building commercial buildings, that's where you get a lot of builder's risk policies being required. Again, if that policy is needed, it'll tell you in the insurance specs of the particular job that you're bidding. Equipment insurance, so all of your equipment needs to be insured to cover obvious things like damage and or theft. The last bullet there, works ABC. So you have insurance on your people, which is added to your labor rates. So again, we went over that in the earlier weeks of this course. So it's an add-on to the base rate of your labor. Carrying on with insurance. So it says there are some projects require project-specific insurance. Excuse me. So I've already mentioned some of the project-specific insurance, like the wrap-up policy or the builder's risk. Those are project-specific. These other three, so this first one and these bottom two, you should have on every project in every tender. So some of the other project-specific policies, again, these will show up in the insurance spec for the job that you're bidding. So increased levels of liability. So maybe the standard liability is 5 million. So maybe on a specific job, you're asked for 10 million liability insurance. So you would need to talk to your insurance broker and ask them what the premium is for this one particular project that you're bidding, to increase your liability insurance from 5 million to 10 million. And that they would give you a lump sum amount, tell you what that cost is, so you could include that into your tender. Some things like, you know, if you're working around ships or on ships, there's different types of insurance. There's boiler type insurance that's not listed here. Things like design build, that's a type of project. So you, the contractor, are teaming up with a design engineer, and your team is designing and you're also building the project. So in that case, you would have your designer, your engineer would have errors and omissions insurance. It's a professional liability insurance policy in case the design engineer makes some mistakes. That policy would kick in if there's any damages related to that design. So all insurance policies are added as an amount to the overall project cost. Typically, they show up in your general conditions in the indirects. Project-specific quotes are provided by your insurer based on the requirements of the tender. So an easy way to get project-specific insurance is to simply forward the project specifications, the whole booklet, to your insurance broker. They know what they're looking for. They will be able to pick out the project-specific items that you need to allow for, give you those pricings. You can even ask them where they found it if you don't know where it is. They'll be happy to point it out to you. I should say that depending on the project size, so how many millions of dollars the overall project value is, insurance can be tens of thousands of dollars. So it's not something that you want to miss. So after insurance comes bonds. So bonds are a third-party guarantee by a surety company. So the surety company guarantees that the contractor will perform his or her contractual obligation to the client. So there's some words in brackets there, principal and obligé. Those are the terms used for contractor and the owner of the project. So the owner being maybe it's a municipality that you're working for. So for example, City of Burnaby would be the client or the obligé. So the bonding company will issue a bond to you, the contractor. So there's a cost to that bond. And what that bond piece of paper says, it tells the client, the owner, that the bonding company guarantees that you, the contractor, will finish the job. it's, if you want to think of it that way, it's another insurance policy is what it is. It's just called a bond. So typically most public tenders, so if you're working for a municipality or the provincial government, for examples, you need to have bonds. So some of those types of bonds include these couple here. So there's a bid bond. So what a bid bond is it covers the difference up to an amount of 10% of your tender value. So if you're the low bidder and you submit a bid bond, which is a requirement of the tender, and the owner of the project, so again, let's use City of Burnaby as the example. City of Burnaby says, contractor XYZ, we're awarding you the contract. You need to sign it, execute the contract. If you refuse to do that, you're obligated to sign the contract if you submit a bid bond. If you do not sign the contract, so if you refuse it, then your bid bond is forfeited. So what that means is your surety company, so that's the company that issued the bid bond, your surety company will pay to the owner, which again is our City of Burnaby example, 10% of the amount of your submitted tender price. So let's just use some examples. If your tender price was $1 million, if the next bidder's price was $1,500,000, City of Burnaby says, contractor XYZ, we're giving you the contract for $1 million. If you refuse to sign the contract, your surety company will cut a check to the City of Burnaby for 10% of $1 million, which is $100,000. Again, bonds they're costly. You need to be aware of when they're required. They're important things to keep track of. That was the example of the bid bond. The performance bond works in a similar fashion. So the bid bond relates to signing the contract once you submit your tender. This performance bond deals with you, the contractor. So you've signed the contract, you've started building the project. This relates to you finishing the job. So again, it's a percentage of your bid price. So again, it relates to if we use that $1 million example. So what this says is typically you see a 50% performance bond is required. So the bonding company is saying 50% of the contract value, which is in our example was $1 million. So 50% of that is $500,000. The surety will cover, yeah, this is written a little bit funny. The percentage dollar amount if the contractor walks away from works that are not completed. So if you've got, of that $1 million contract, if you have $200,000 left of work to do, and you, the contractor, just walk away, you demobilize all your equipment and you no longer are working on the job. If there's $200,000 of work left to do and there's a 50% performance bond on the job, again, your surety company will cover that difference. They will pay that difference to the owner so that the owner can hire somebody else to finish the project. So again, big dollars we're talking about here. It's not a good idea to have your surety company pay out these dollar amounts. Your insurance or your bond premiums skyrocket if you, the contractor, are forcing your surety company to pay out all these big lump sum dollar amounts. It's possible that you'll lose your bonding ability. Your surety company will not give you a bond anymore. So what that means is you cannot bid tenders that require bid bonds. So it's a big deal. I've been through other courses where this is kind of glossed over and it's not really talked about much. I disagree with that. You as the estimator need to know this. Now, it wouldn't be your decision to sign a contract or not. That would be your boss's decision. But it's important for you to know that you as the estimator, you've got a lot of responsibility. If there's errors in an estimate, so again, let's go back to our bid bond example, where you bid $1 million. Let's say the next bidder was $2 million, and then third and fourth were above there. So clearly, if your bid was $1 million and the next person's was $2 million, a mistake was made, likely by you. You missed something. There's obviously not enough cost in your bid. At that point, your owner, your company owner, your manager can decide not to sign the contract and forfeit your bid bond. If you look at it, you're either losing 10% of $1 million, so $100,000, or you're possibly losing $1 million, which is the difference between your bid and the next bidder's bid, meaning you've missed a significant dollar amount of cost in your tender. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Again, it's important to understand what these things are and how they affect estimates and contracts. This isn't a contract law course, so I won't go too much further into bonds. The other bond there is a labor and materials bond. So again, it's similar to the performance bond. This one guarantees to the owner, so City of Burnaby, for our example, guarantees to the city that you, the contractor, are paying your subs and suppliers. So bond cost, so those costs are added as an amount to the overall project cost. So again, if you're bidding a project, you think it's $1 million project, you call up your bonding company and you say, they'll typically have a form that you can fill out. You fill in things like who the owner is, what your estimated project value is, the estimated schedule for the job, a couple different things. And they can tell you what your bond cost will be for the project. And that, of course, that cost would be added into your indirects or your general conditions section of your tender. So the contractor must be bondable to obtain a bond. So being bondable is based on your company's corporate experience, as well as your reputation in the industry. So have you forfeited 3 bid bonds in the last 5 years? If you've done that, you're likely not bondable. You cannot get a bid bond. My company has been around since 1986. We have never forfeited a bid bond, touch wood. So we've never had to have our bonding company pay out lump sums of money on our behalf. So because that's never happened to us, then our bonding rates are lower. So the cost to provide a bond is lower, which is an advantage during tender time. So project quotes are provided by the surety company, which is the bonding company, same thing, based on requirements of the tender. So again, they may give you some ratio like this, the bonding company. They may say the cost for the bonds is $8 per $1,000 of project cost. So we'll go through an example a little bit later today on how to calculate something like that. So bonds are based on the entire amount of the project. So including overhead costs, profit, So all your general conditions, all your direct costs, indirects, everything, including your profit. So you add all that together, come up with a total kind of bottom line number. That's the number that you tell your bonding company, or that you use to do this calculation with right here. Again, we'll a little bit later today, we'll actually do this calculation, show you how it works. It's fairly straightforward. So some needs for insurance. So there's a photo here. This is fairly old, looks like 2006. So this excavator was being mobilized to a job site somewhere, and it looks like it was on the low bed, and the boom or the stick of the excavator was up too high, and it hit the underside of this overpass, and of course caused catastrophic damage here. Likely this highway was shut down and that overpass was shut down in order for it to get fixed. So that's where insurance comes in, so that you, the contractor, don't have to pay for this cost. The insurance company does. Now your rates are going to go up, but in comparison to fixing this overpass, fairly minimal cost increase. So the bond arrangement, so we were talking about bid bonds and performance and labor and material bonds. So here's just a photo of the relationship. So the principal, that's you, the general contractor. You have a construction contract with the obligé, which is the project owner, so City of Burnaby in our example. So we've got a contract between these two here. So you, the general, also have a relationship with your surety, your bonding company. So you provide them with a bond premium, so a smaller dollar amount to purchase the bonds for the job. And then the surety issues the bond to the project owner, so again, City of Burnaby, promising them to do different things depending on what the bonds are for. Again, bid bond, performance bond, labor and materials bond. So you are paying the bonding company, but if you do something that you're not supposed to do, then the bonding company pays the owner accordingly, is the gist of it. So profit, sometimes a bad word in the construction industry, not for contractors, but it is for consultants, sometimes for consultants, as well as sometimes for owners, like again, our example, City of Burnaby. So lots of people think that contractors should work without making a profit. Of course, any business that's in business is there to make money. Not only pay their employees, but the company needs to earn additional money as well. So profit is the money a business makes after accounting for all the revenue less expenses. So all the revenue is the amount that you're paid from the owner, so City of Burnaby, for example, less expenses. So you need to pay your crew, you need to pay for your equipment, you need to pay your subs, you need to buy all your materials, you need to buy your insurance policies, your bonds. All of those things are expenses. So difference between the total money in, which is the revenue, and the total money out, which is your expenses, that is profit. Each company has target profits depending on project type and complexity. Typically, they range anywhere from 3 to 15 or 20%. Depends on the size of the job. So size, complexity, the amount of risk, what the market's like. So for example, if you're bidding a utility project and there's 3 bidders, you may add additional profit to that tender versus the same job where there's 15 bidders. So you would need to add less profit in order to be possibly the low bidder. So that's what's meant by good market versus, you know, a poor market. So good market meaning there's fewer bidders, poor market meaning there's less jobs out there to bid. So all the contractors in your location are all bidding on the same few jobs. So profit is usually market-based decision by upper management. So you, the estimator, typically do not get to determine what the profit is. You're typically told by your manager or your boss what percentage or what dollar amount to add as profit on your tender. So it's applied to all costs, including overhead. So depends if you're adding profit as a percentage or just simply as a dollar amount. Are you adding $100,000 to that $1 million job, or are you adding, you know, 11%? That type of thing. So profit continued. So there's two different kind of terminologies here. I don't differentiate between the two. I only use one of them in my day-to-day job. There's two listed here, so I'll explain what they both are. Well, the difference between the two is this word here. So profit markup versus profit margin. So those are the two different terms. Markup is the amount of profit based on the cost. Usually expressed as a percentage. So if we did an example here, so if we had a small estimate, say the cost was $8,000, if we put 25% markup, right, this term here, onto this cost, then our profit is $2,000. So 25% of 8,000 is 2,000. So that would be added on to the 8,000 cost. So the other way of analyzing this is with the word, so margin, so profit margin. Margin is the amount of profit based on revenue. So again, there's two different words here, two different numbers that we look at. Markup is based on cost numbers. Margin is based on revenue numbers. Again, usually expressed as a percentage. So if we take that same $8,000 cost and we say a 20% margin, is $2,000 in profit based on a $10,000 overall revenue. So it's a little bit hard to understand on how this one works. So margin is based on the total amount. So when you add your 2,000 profit, you get a total of 10,000 here. So 20% of 10,000 is your margin of 2,000. So this version up here is what I believe most of the industry uses. We'll go through an example on this one as well shortly, how that works. So the point is, be clear of these two bullets here when you're finalizing your estimate with management. So does management want you to put 25% markup on? Do they want 20% margin? Just be clear on what they're telling you to add. So, I mean, by all means, ask them exactly what they mean. Say, do you mean add 25% to the cost, right? You can be that specific. A manager is not going to get mad at you being a junior estimator if you ask this question. The more questions, the better when you're just learning to estimate. So profit is typically spread across all bid items based on the amount of those bid items. So in other words, if one item accounts for 10% of the revenue, it will draw 10% of the amount of profit. So that's how it's prorated. So this is what your exercise is today, is doing this analysis. I'll go through the first couple of lines in the exercise to show you exactly how it works. Once you've seen it done a couple times, I believe it's fairly straightforward. This would be considered a balanced bid, this method that we're going to do here. So an unbalanced bid may apportion the overhead and profit to different items depending on risk or the chance that they may not be completed. So an example there is a provisional item. So if you see in a tender form, if there's a provisional item, what that means is that tender item may or may not be actually built. So it's up to the owner to decide if they want to have you, the contractor, build this item, whatever this provisional item is, or they say, no, do not build it. It's costs too much, so you're not going to build it. So in that type of scenario, when you have provisional sums showing up in your tender form, typically you don't want to add your prorated amount of profit to that provisional item, simply because if the owner decides to delete that item or not do it, then that amount of profit that you've put into that provisional item, you're not going to get. So some percentage of your supervision, you're not going to get. Some percent of your site office costs, you're not going to get. Some percentage of your profit, you're not going to get. Again, we'll go through an example of what exactly that means in today's lesson. So after PowerPoint, we have a short lesson where I show you some calculation examples of a few of the things that we've looked at in the PowerPoint. So estimating software, so it enables accurate calculations and it gives you useful reports that you can use to analyze your estimates. So estimating software is only as good as you, the estimator, how well you input the information. Estimating software is not magic. You can't input incorrect numbers and expect the software to fix it. Again, the software isn't magic. If you think of Excel, if you punch in 4 times 2, which of course is 8, and you expect that number to be 20, you know, Excel isn't going to fix that for you. It knows what 4 times 2 is. So estimating software is useful. It speeds up the process. I use various types of software in my estimating. But again, it's not going to fix your mistake. So you need to have an idea of how to use the software and then take it from there. So I actually teach another class for BCITs that's a computer estimating class. So I teach how to use a piece of software, which as a matter of fact is this Sage one right here. So there's, as it says here, there's many others. These are just some of them. So B2W is bid to win. I'm not sure if this is related to that or if it's completely different. Heavy bid, that's a civil type piece of software. Sage is typically used for buildings, not always, but that's typically what it's used for. Excel, it's simple, requires you to build your formats. It's a whole lot easier to make a mistake using Excel than it is to use any of these other pieces of software. I highly recommend not using Excel if you're a beginner estimator. Simply because some of these other pieces, well, most of these other pieces of software will help you with your quantities and your dollar amounts. They'll catch some of your errors. Excel won't. Excel won't catch anything. So I would recommend not using Excel if you're beginning to estimate. Others here, such as PlanSwift. So most of these are, of course, Windows-based. There's others that are out there that include an on-screen takeoff. So you bring your PDF drawings up on the page, up on the screen, and you do your takeoffs using the PDFs. So you come up with all your different quantities, and then you do your estimates that way. So there's lots of software out there that can help you estimate. Not only get you your tender quantities, your estimate quantities, right? Your takeoff quantities. Also help you with your dollar amounts, your total costs. Most of these, I believe, have sample durations where you can, like a trial period, where you can try them out for a week or two. So I recommend trying them out, even if you have no intention of buying them. Downloading their software and just trying them. Okay, cost control. So cost control is managing the costs of a specific scope of work based on your estimated costs. So estimating and cost control are linked. So sample method. So break out all the estimated costs into those kind of three different divisions. So unit pricing, general conditions, overheads. Assign codes to each. Track costs accordingly to the appropriate codes. So then you can monitor the costs for each code and see if you're on track or you're beating your estimate, right? You're doing things quicker, more cost effectively than you estimated. So that last bullet there, if you're on track, this is a good thing, means you're making more money than you thought you would. If you're not on track and you're not meeting your productions, you know, that type of thing, then you're spending more money than you anticipated at spending, which isn't a good thing. So I have a little example of, back a page. We'll stop this share just for a moment, and I'll get you to look at the little scratch pad here. So if in our estimate we needed to excavate 1,000 cubic meters, and we estimated that that would cost us $10 per cubic meter. So that's in our estimate. So now you go ahead and start the project. So now you're looking at your cost control. So your crew is actually out on site doing this excavation. So you're tracking the costs. So your first 450 cubic meters. So let's just say 450 to date. Your cost is $5,000. So are you over your budget or under your budget? So at this point, 450 cubic meters, based on our estimate, we said it should cost us $10 per cubic meter. So 450 times 10 would be, so 450 times 10 is $4,500. So it should be costing us $4,500 at this point, but we've spent $5,000. So we can see that at this point, we're over budget. We're spending more doing this than we estimated that we would. So, okay, the project keeps going. The crew is still excavating. So we hit the 700 cubic meter to date. So that's, you've done 700 cubic meters total. Whoops, an E. So now our total cost is $6,000. So maybe at this point, we analyzed our procedures, what we were doing in the field, made some changes. So at the 700 cubic meter mark, we check our total costs. So again, we do the same analysis. So at 700 cubic meters, we estimated $10 a cubic meter this should be costing us. So our cost at this point, based on our estimate, should be $7,000, but we've only spent $6,000. So we're spending less than we estimated that we would. So we're under budget. So we're making more money than we thought. Or you could think of it the other way, we're spending less money than we thought we would. So the last example, so we actually hit, the bid quantity was 1,000. Maybe the engineer's estimate was wrong, so the bid quantity was wrong. We actually end up doing 1,200 cubic meters. That was our total. We finished there. So our total cost, we hit 10,500. So again, based on this 1,200 cubic meters, we estimated still a cost of $10. So this doesn't change. 1,200 cubes times 10 bucks, 12,000. So we thought it would have cost us 12,000, but it only ended up costing us 10,500. So overall, for that item, for that tender item, we were under budget. So we beat our budget. Estimate, budget. I'm using those words interchangeably. So that's what cost control is all about. Tracking your costs to date and comparing them to what you estimated to see if you're either over budget or under budget. You always like to be under budget, or at least on budget. So in the end, if this 1,200 cubic meters cost us $10 per cubic meter, we would say we made our budget, we hit our budget. Okay, so I think we had one last page left on the PowerPoint. I'll go back here. So that's what we just looked at there on the scratch pad was monitoring your costs. Oops. There we go. So cost control continued. So a well-prepared estimate enables quick development of the framework for cost control. So well-prepared meaning organized, easy to follow. Organization is key here. Effective cost control improves project management. So the better you can track costs and compare them to your estimate or your budget. So again, I use those words interchangeably. They mean the same thing to me. So the better you can track your costs and compare them to your estimate, the better you can estimate future projects. So if we go back to my example there on the scratch pad, and we see that on that 1,200 cubic meter example, we said the total cost there was 10,500 for 1,200 cubic meters. That actually works out to $8.75 cubic meter, not $10 per cubic meter. So maybe in the future, if we're bidding another project that has very similar conditions to this excavation that we did, maybe instead of $10 a cubic meter, we lower our rate down to maybe $9 a cubic meter. Right? We get closer to that 875 that we just proved out in our cost control. So the tighter you can make those numbers, the better chance you have as an estimator to being the lowest bidder where you still make money. So again, that's the whole point of estimating. You want to submit a tender that your company can do the project for and make money, but you also need to be the lowest tender. So review of cost control, now an estimator to adjust. Yeah, so that's just what I talked about. Adjusting future estimates to reflect recent productivities and job costs. Ensure your estimate includes indirect costs and profit. Okay, so any questions on the PowerPoint? No? Okay, so we're going to have a break. Let's have a 15-minute break. Let's come back at 10 after 8. So 10 after 8, we will go through a quick lesson. I'll show you how to do some overhead and profit calculations. And then I'll hand out the exercise and I'll go through the first 2 lines of the exercise to show you kind of what I'm looking for. And then that'll be the end of class. So let me pause the recording. Okay, so we're back. Let's look at the quick little lesson that I have here. So share my screen again. So short little lesson, just showing how to calculate some of the overhead and profit dollar amounts. So a good one to start with is, so you have a supervisor, he or she, total cost to you, the company, is $60 an hour. And then they have a pickup that they use at $15 an hour is that cost. So what's the monthly rate for this supervisor pickup combination based on a 40-hour work week? So if I make the solution in red, so you simply add up the 2 hourly rates. So 60 plus 15 times 40 hours a week times 4 weeks a month works out to $12,000 a month for that supervisor with their pickup. So then you, the last thing that you would do here is multiply by the number of months that that supervisor is needed. So the bond performance and the labor and materials, so all three of those bonds. So maybe your bonding company tells you that the cost for all three of those bonds is $8 per 1,000 of contract value. So what's the bond cost if the project cost is $160,000? So how do you calculate that? So you take your project cost, $160,000, you multiply by this 8 over 1,000. So you go 160,000 times 8 divided by 1,000, works out to $1,280. So in this example, for that $8 per 1,000, these bonds would cost $1,280 based on this contract value. So the last example relates to that, the markup margin, the two different terms there that we looked at. So calculate the percentage of markup and margin. So the project cost is $152,000. So the manager is looking for a profit of $20,000. So what we're trying to calculate here is percentages. So calculate the percentage of markup. So how do you do that? So markup is based on cost. So it's simply the 20,000 profit divided by the cost, 152,000, equals 13.16%. So you would say adding 20,000 profit to this cost is a 13.1% markup. So similarly, the margin calculation, again, we're trying to calculate a percentage. So how do we do that? So margin is based on revenue instead of cost. So again, that $20,000 profit. So this time we're doing 20,000 and we're dividing by the total revenue, meaning the total amount that we're going to bring in, not just the cost amount, but including the $20,000 profit. So 152,000 plus 20,000, so that's 172,000. So you're going 20,000 divided by 172,000. So it's a slightly smaller percentage, 11.63. So you could say, again, on this $152,000 job with a 20% profit, you've got 11.63% margin. So it's all in the terminology, what words are being used. The total dollar amounts here are the same. It's 20 plus 152, which is 172,000. Okay, any questions on that? Typically, the markup method is used mostly. So this, unless you're told otherwise, this will be the calculation that you're doing. But again, it's good to ask your manager once you start estimating which one of these they want you to do. Okay, so we'll close that one. So the last thing to look at is I've posted today's exercise to the Learning Hub. So I will it's a spreadsheet. So I'm going to bring that up on the screen and I'll show you how to do the first 2 line items. So this is a sample of a tender page. So you've got all these bid items here, right? These are all your bid item numbers. We've looked at something similar to this in the past. So you've got all these descriptions of items, you've got estimated quantities here, or tender quantities, I should say. So you got import fill, 10,000 ton, there's some riprap. Some of these are not bold anymore. So there's riprap, there's some storm sewer here. Looks like there's some manholes. Provisional sum. Now I talked about this in the past, or I shouldn't say the past, earlier tonight I talked about provisional sums. So I'm not going to tell you how to do this last line. I'm hoping that you'll go back and look at the PowerPoint and hopefully we'll have listened to what I said on provisional sums and make your own determination here. I'll do these first 2 line items. So the health and safety plan, and then this one, the excavation and disposal. So these are all tender items. So these are all direct costs that we have here in our estimate. So what's listed down here is our overheads. So these would be our general conditions, our indirects. So that's what all these are. There's a total dollar amount here of all of them. So we've got supervision, we've got office costs, we have an insurance quote, and then on this estimate or this tender, we did not need a bond, so there's no value there. So this is the total amount of our overheads. Maybe I'll blow this up a little. So 15,286. So now this column here, we've already gone through our estimate and finished our bid on the direct costs. So we've calculated that our health and safety plan bid item, the cost there is $4,000. For our excavation and disposal, based on this 390 cubic meters, our total cost there, so that's labor, equipment, materials, and subs. So our total cost there is 11,700, etc., all the way down. So we've got a bottom here, $254,000. So this is our total direct costs. So these are directs. These are indirects. So now these next 4 columns are what you're going to fill in for the assignment. So again, I'll do the first 2 rows. So what's the overhead portion that is allotted to this line item? So how do we calculate that? So this is the total overhead, this 15,286 number. But we need to spread these indirects. So we need to spread this $15,000 proportionately over all of these items. So how do you do that? So there's a formula that you use, and because I'm giving you a spreadsheet, hopefully it's fairly easy for you to do this. This exercise should take you minutes, not hours. Once you write the 4 formulas, that's basically all there is. You just have to copy them all down. Now, something different happens down here. I'm not going to tell you what that is. Okay, so how do we know how much of this 15,000 overhead gets allotted to this line item. As I said, there's a calculation. So the calculation is, you take the total cost for this line item, which is this column here, so the 4,000 number. We divide it by the total direct cost. Okay, so that gives us a percentage. So it looks like it's 1.57%. So then what you do is, you don't need the brackets there. I'm just doing this for, actually, I think you do need the brackets there. Excel's a little different. Okay, so you calculate the percentage that we just did there. So the 4,000 over the total. And then you multiply it by the total indirect amount. So what that is saying is, we said this number was 1.57% of that number. So what we want to do in this column here is take 1.5%, 1.57% of our indirects and allot them to this row. So that's dollars. So that's our prorated overhead for this row. So 1.57% of this number is $240.01. Now, it's not 1.57 for all these, right? So again, that same calculation is, we take the total cost for this line item, which now in this bid item, it's 11,000. It's no longer 4,000. And divide it by our total direct costs. And then again, so let's see what that number is. It'll be a percentage. So it looks like it's about 5%, 4.59%. So what we want to do is take 4.59% of the total indirects. So we do that by multiplying by the total there. That works out to $702.02. So that's the calculation that you do all the way down here. So there's a way to check if you've done all these correctly. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. Hopefully you can figure that out. So the next row over, on this project, we want a profit of 12%. So we obviously need to add 12% to something. So what are we adding 12% to? Well, we're going to do it to each row, right? All of these will get this calculation. So we need to add these two together. So we're going to add the cost to the overhead amount for that item. So I'll add those together. So the total there is $4,240. So then we need to calculate 12% of that. So how do you calculate 12%? You multiply by 0.12. So 12% of those two numbers added together is $509, rounded up. So total, of course, you simply add the total of those three numbers. So the cost plus the overhead plus the profit is your total amount right here. So the last one is your unit price. So how do you calculate the unit price? The units for this one are lump sum. So the quantity is 100% or 1. So the unit price here is simply the total dollars you would not divide by 100%. So let me show you what that looks like. So that's not the unit price I'm looking for. So lump sums are either 100% or they're one lump sum. I'm going to change the format there. So 1. So you're simply, for lump sums, you're simply taking the total dollars dividing by 1. So it's, your total is the unit price for lump sum rows. Okay, so this next row down here is where things change a little bit on the end. So the profit calculation is the exact same. So again, we're adding the cost of the tender item. We're adding to it the overhead that we just calculated. And then we're multiplying by 12%. So we're figuring out what 12% of that sum is. It's $1,488. So then, of course, the total is simply add those three together. Straightforward. So now the unit price on this one. So this row is not a lump sum. It's so many cubic meters. So this is how you calculate your unit price for this tender item. So you take your total dollars and simply divide by the quantity. So we could say that our excavation and disposal bid item, the all-in price, so including overhead and profit and the cost, is $35.62 per cubic meter. So your assignment is to finish these four columns all the way down to the bottom here. Any questions? No? Okay, so I'll stick around for a little while longer. Alex, yeah, asphalt. So asphalt is a provisional sum. So in the PowerPoint, I mentioned, which slide was it? Let's look through here. Yes, so near the end of the PowerPoint presentation, so it's in the profit section, I talk about provisional sums. So it's up to you how to decide what to do with this provisional sum line item. Remember, a provisional sum means the owner can delete it if they want to. There's two different answers that I will accept for this row, for this bid item, for the provisional sum item. I won't tell you what those are. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll stick around a little while longer. Maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. Ivan, you had a question. Do we need to find 12% from overhead? I don't understand your question, Ivan. You can leave it in Excel. It'll be easier for me to mark. So leave it as Excel. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but the meeting will continue. I won't shut the meeting down yet in case there's more questions.